Welcome to the breakdown, where history comes alive. In this video, we'll dive deep into the life of a forgotten boy king whose name was lost to time, until his glittering tomb brought him back into the spotlight. Tutankhamun ruled an empire on the edge of collapse. His legacy was nearly erased but rediscovered thousands of years later in the Valley of the Kings. From his brief reign to the treasures buried with him, his story is both dazzling and mysterious. With palace conspiracies, supposed curses, and unsolved riddles, Tutankhamun became more than just a pharaoh. He became a symbol of rebirth and immortality. For over 3,000 years, his golden mask defied time. But behind that eternal face, who was the real man, the boy, the king? Before we begin this epic journey, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks, and enjoy the adventure. Around 1350 BCE, the world was in flux. Let's take a wide-angle look, from Egypt to China, through Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, Mesopotamia, Mycenaean Greece, and even civilizations in Mesoamerica and the Indian subcontinent. In this intro, we'll explore the major empires, their trade routes, and the religious or climate shifts that shaped that era. Central to this is Tutankhamun, the young Egyptian pharaoh known today for his nearly intact tomb. His reign came just after the upheaval caused by the radical reforms of Akhenaten during the Amarna period. Our story begins around 1350 BCE, a key moment in the balance of power across the ancient world. In Egypt, Akhenaten, whose name means beneficial to Aten, pushed a bold religious revolution. He promoted the exclusive worship of Aten, the sun disk, disrupting Egypt's long-standing polytheism. He moved the capital to Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, sidelining the powerful temples and priests of gods like Amun and Ra. This led to economic and religious turmoil. Resources dried up, temples were neglected, and the once powerful priesthood lost influence. By 1350 BCE, the experiment was falling apart, and Egypt's traditional beliefs began creeping back in. Internal tensions grew, especially between Aten's priests and those loyal to Amun, especially in Thebes. Egypt's economy, tightly linked to temple operations, was struggling, and the wealthy elite were navigating unfamiliar territory. Meanwhile, outside powers watched closely as Egypt, one of the richest nations of its time, showed signs of weakness. To the north, in central Anatolia, modern Turkey, the Hittite Empire was rising. Around 1350 BCE, King Suppiluliuma of Pharaohs consolidated power over this fragmented region of city-states and began expanding into Syria, a key area for trade and military strategy. Many of these Syrian cities had long-standing ties to Egypt, but were now caught between the growing influence of the Hittites and the traditional dominance of the pharaohs. From the Egyptian crown to a changing world. What was really happening around 1350 BCE? While Egypt still held symbolic power, internal weakness following the Amarna reforms gave the Hittite king a perfect chance to expand into territories that had once been under Egyptian control. Meanwhile, in northern Mesopotamia to the east, a new power was emerging, Middle Assyria. This was the era of King Ashur-uballit I, who ruled from the city of Ashur, located in what is now northern Iraq. Assyria had deep roots, growing along the Tigris River and gradually expanding into areas once contested by older cities like Mari and Babylon. At the time, Babylon was ruled by the Kassites, a dynasty with origins in the Iranian highlands. They had settled in Babylon since the 16th century BCE and managed to build a stable kingdom that preserved Mesopotamian traditions. But now, Ashur-uballit was starting to challenge Kassite Babylon. The balance of power was shifting. Assyria was on the rise, eager to expand, while Babylon tried to maintain the status quo and keep control over key trade routes. Tensions escalated, and new conflicts for dominance in Mesopotamia loomed. Amid all this, Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria sometimes exchanged ambassadors. This wasn't just about diplomacy, it was about temporary alliances and strategic maneuvering. The famous Amarna letters, clay tablets discovered in the 19th century, record these royal correspondences between the pharaoh and his allies or rivals in Mesopotamia and the Levant. They offer a rare behind-the-scenes look at the geopolitical chessboard of the time. Meanwhile, at the western edge of the Aegean world, the powerful Mycenaean civilization was on the rise. The city of Mycenae, one of the best known, was located in the Peloponnese in southern Greece. Around 1350 BCE, Mycenae was thriving, with fortified palaces and administrative centers managing agricultural goods and exporting luxury items. Olive oil, used for cooking, lighting, and body care, was a cornerstone of the Mycenaean economy. Their pottery, highly valued across the Mediterranean, has been found in Egypt, Cyprus, and along the coast of the Levant. This shows just how connected the region was through trade. The Mycenaeans used sturdy ships to transport oil jars, fine ceramics, wine, metals, and textiles. Their strong military organization, defensive architecture, massive stone walls, and complex palace systems made them formidable. Even though we know less about their political structures compared to Egypt or Mesopotamia, archaeological evidence points to a hierarchical society led by a wanax or king, supported by officials, scribes, and a disciplined army. While civilizations in the eastern Mediterranean were booming, over in China, the Shang dynasty ruled. This dynasty, which lasted from about 1600 to 1046 BCE, was centered in the Yellow River Valley, the cradle of Chinese civilization. By 1350 BCE, the Shang were famous for their elaborate rituals and stunning bronze craftsmanship, like ceremonial axes decorated with animal motifs. Their oracle bone inscriptions, carved into turtle shells and animal bones, document complex divination practices, showing how important religion and ancestor worship were. This was a society organized around a central ruler and a warrior aristocracy. Their use of bronze, for weapons and religious objects, was cutting-edge technology for the time. They also engaged in long-distance trade, though intercontinental routes like the Silk Road didn't exist yet. On the other side of the world, in Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization was already beginning to decline. Though their peak came later, between 1200 and 400 BCE, they're often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. They gradually influenced later civilizations like the Maya, especially through monumental architecture, massive stone heads, and ritual practices. Their decline mirrors another distant collapse, the slow unraveling of the great Indus Valley civilization. Between roughly 2600 and 1900 BCE, cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had flourished. But by 1350 BCE, they were in decay, partially or fully abandoned. Internal social and economic shifts, along with changes in water management and climate, sped up the collapse of this once great urban society. Power fractured into smaller local communities. The global picture around 1350 BCE was one of dynamic change. Climate shifts, such as changes in sea levels and river flows, were another key part of this transformation. It was a world full of movement, tension, and transition. Changes in fertile land regions affected farming and livestock, which in turn impacted how well kingdoms could feed their populations. There were long-distance trade networks, less frequent than in later centuries, but still significant. Maritime routes along the coasts of the Aegean and Phoenicia provided countless trade outlets. Old overland routes linking Africa, Asia, and Europe helped circulate valuable materials like gold, copper, tin, and ivory. In the case of obsidian, trade networks had existed since prehistoric times. By 1350 BCE, Anatolian obsidian routes were still active. This volcanic glass was prized for its sharp edges and use in tools or luxury items. From Lebanon, cedarwood, a highly valued material known for its strength and sweet scent, was exported. Kings of the Near East used it for building palaces, ships, and high-end furniture. In Egypt, gold was a key diplomatic asset. Pharaohs mined it from Nubia, a vast region stretching between the first cataract of the Nile and modern-day Sudan. Egyptian expeditions extracted large quantities of gold, most of which flowed into the Nile Delta and royal capitals. This wealth allowed Egypt to pursue a foreign policy based on what's often called gold diplomacy, where pharaohs would send gold ingots or luxury goods to foreign princes in exchange for peace or political support. The Amarna letters reveal many such requests from neighboring kings asking for Egyptian gold, which they said was as plentiful as dust. Still, by around 1350 BCE, the religious and administrative reforms introduced by Akhenaten disrupted these trade flows. Mine management and caravan logistics often relied on temples and traditional institutions that Akhenaten's reforms had undermined. Gold was still coming in, but not as reliably as before. Central authorities even tried to limit or restrict gold supplies, making deliveries harder to manage. Tutankhamun emerged from this chaos as the young pharaoh who succeeded Akhenaten. His reign is seen as a return to traditional religion after the disruption caused by Akhenaten's monotheistic experiment, which had shaken the foundations of Egyptian belief. Tutankhamun symbolized the restoration of lunar worship and traditional rituals. His rule was short and lacked major diplomatic or military achievements, but the nearly intact discovery of his tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter transformed his legacy forever. Tomb KV-62, located in the Valley of the Kings, contained an extraordinary treasure, far better preserved than most other royal tombs, which had been looted. The artifacts inside, including the famous golden funerary mask, stunned the world. DNA analysis of his mummy revealed insights into his ancestry. His early death, around 1323 BCE, sparked endless theories. During the interwar period, the press sensationalized the discovery and fueled the myth of the pharaoh's curse, attracting global attention. Today, Tutankhamun is one of the most recognizable symbols of ancient Egypt. His golden mask is one of the most iconic images in the world, even though his actual rule was relatively minor. Thanks to the incredible discovery of his burial site, he overshadowed more politically significant pharaohs. Western fascination with Egyptology helped promote an image of Egypt as mysterious and eternal, influencing artistic movements like Art Deco. Exhibits of his treasures have drawn massive crowds and generated huge revenues. Hollywood helped feed this fantasy by turning ancient Egypt into a popular cultural myth. Historically, Tutankhamun represents religious restoration. From the moment he took the throne, temples dedicated to Amun were reopened, and his name was changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, marking a return to Amun worship. Diplomatic relations were restructured to project a sense of political stability. In reality, most of the power was likely held by senior officials like Ai and Horemheb, but the pharaoh still served as a symbol of national recovery. Egypt was reasserting its identity, while the Hittite Empire, Middle Assyria, Mycenaean Greece, and other states continued expanding or reforming. Although it didn't collapse overnight, the decades after 1350 BCE would bring new conflicts and shifting alliances, especially following Tutankhamun's death and the rise of new dynasties. Yet Egypt maintained its prestigious status among the great powers of the time, thanks to its thousand-year legacy, its Nile-fed prosperity, gold resources, and unparalleled architecture. While the Amarna period was often seen as heretical, it didn't diminish Egypt's cultural impact. On the contrary, it marked a new artistic and spiritual vision, and a different way of managing the state, even if later rulers responded with a more conservative backlash after Akhenaten's disappearance. Around 1350 BCE, the world was more interconnected than ever. Obsidian, cedar wood, and gold were being traded across Asia and Africa. In places like Mesoamerica, India, and others, civilizations were either declining or undergoing restructuring. Communication routes formed a complex web, allowing the exchange of luxury goods, ideas, and craftsmanship. Despite internal turmoil caused by the Amarna reforms, Egypt remained a spiritual hub and a cultural magnet. When Tutankhamun came to the throne in 1333 BCE, he managed to restore some balance, at least until his death in 1323 BCE. His real legacy came much later, when his dazzling tomb was discovered in 1922, captivating the world and turning this boy king into a legend. That legend, rooted in real historical events, like the end of the Amarna era and the vast political and religious power tied to Egypt's gold, continues to inspire fascination and archaeological exploration to this day. The 14th century BCE was a time of major change in Egypt. For generations, worship of Amun had been at the core of Egyptian religious life, especially in Thebes. But when Amenhotep IV became pharaoh, later renaming himself Akhenaten, he brought a radical shift. By his 5th year as ruler, he dedicated himself exclusively to Aten, the sun god, pushing aside Egypt's traditional deities. This caused upheaval across Egypt's government, economy, and society. Akhenaten's break from tradition introduced a form of monotheism, placing Aten at the center of worship. Temples dedicated to Amun, once rich and powerful, were gradually neglected. pilgrimages faded, and people felt the loss of public rituals. Since the economy heavily relied on temple donations, it began to suffer. Temples had functioned as economic hubs, distributing food and wages to a large portion of the population. Akhenaten also decided to build a brand new capital, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, on the east bank of the Nile. Free from any previous religious associations, the city became the center of his power. He built palaces, temples dedicated to Aten, and elite residences. Workers and architects labored tirelessly to bring his vision to life. Relief carvings from that era often show Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti worshipping Aten, depicted as a sun disk with rays ending in hands reaching toward the royal family. But this massive project had serious consequences, especially for Egypt's economy. With the sidelining of Amun and his priesthood, temples lost their banking and community roles. The effort to move the royal court and build the new city drained resources from older centers like Karnak and Memphis, leaving many monuments unfinished. Even stone quarries that once supplied traditional temples now served Akhetaten. Over time, distrust grew between followers of the new faith and people in the old cities, who were suffering from declining income and weakening state administration. Akhenaten's religious reforms were a major challenge, but they were only part of Egypt's problems. Letters found at Amarna, written in Akkadian, reveal how Egypt ramped up its foreign diplomacy, especially using gold from Nubian mines. This gold was a tool for building alliances and securing treaties with powers like Mitanni, Babylon, and the Hittites. The Amarna letters include repeated requests for lavish gifts and marriage alliances to keep peace in the region. Akhenaten had to juggle his internal religious revolution with maintaining diplomatic relations abroad. Gold became a key bargaining chip, deepening political dependency. Through gifts of gold, Egypt managed to maintain relative peace. But the isolation of the royal court and its break with the Theban elite weakened the empire. Diplomatic ties began to fray, and city-states under Egyptian control started to rebel, complaining that Egypt failed to help them defend against attacks or uprisings. Akhetaten may have shined with the radiance of Aten, but Akhenaten's reforms stirred unrest. Amun's priesthood, once incredibly powerful, lost much of its influence and privileges. Ordinary Egyptians, especially in Thebes, were unsettled by the abandonment of long-standing traditions, the disruption of religious festivals, and the neglect of statues representing the sacred Theban triad, Amun, Mut, and Khonsu. This wasn't just about symbolism. Taxes and donations to temples had sustained the kingdom's economy. Disconnecting from that system hurt Egypt's stability. Akhenaten tried to fill the gap by appointing loyalists, like certain scribes from Akhetaten, into important roles, essentially building a new state structure. But the reforms remained fragile, not just because of their ambition, but also due to Akhenaten's own personality and the situation at court. His wife, Queen Nefertiti, appears frequently in official art and played a visible role in this unique chapter of Egyptian history. Aten rituals were sometimes carried out without Akhenaten even being there, and the increasing visibility of Queen Nefertiti during this period raises some interesting questions. Was she actually exercising real power while Akhenaten focused solely on worshipping the sun disk, Aten? The documents from that time don't clearly explain how power was divided. Toward the end of Akhenaten's reign, Egypt's international position became more complicated. The Amarna letters showed that Egypt's military grip over the Levant was weakening. Local leaders took advantage of Egypt's inaction to attack the pharaoh's allies, who repeatedly begged for reinforcements but got no help. Meanwhile, the Hittites, led by Suppiluliuma, were expanding into Syria. Akhenaten remained fixated on his religious reforms and on building his new city, Akhetaten, which left Egypt diplomatically disengaged and militarily exposed. Even though gold trade continued, regional conflicts grew worse. Akhenaten likely died around 1336 or 1334 BCE, leaving a power vacuum with no clear plan for succession. The cause of his death, whether illness, conspiracy, or natural causes, is still unclear. He was followed by two mysterious successors, Smenkhkare and Neferuaten, whose identities and even genders are still debated. Some believe Smenkhkare was a close relative of Akhenaten, while others argue that Neferuaten might have actually been Nefertiti, ruling under a different name. The fragmented tombs and inscriptions from that period make it hard to establish a clear timeline. Smenkkare's reign was brief, And although his name appears on a few monuments in Akhenaten, he never really solidified his rule. He may have tried to ease religious tensions a bit, as suggested by some evidence that he toned down the more radical parts of Aten worship. Still, the archaeological record is too scarce to draw any firm conclusions. What little exists suggests minor religious adjustments, not a full reversal. The Aten cult remained dominant, and Egypt's social and economic struggles continued. As for Nefertiti, the mystery runs deeper. The name appears in royal records from the Amarna period, but scholars aren't sure whether it refers to Nefertiti or another royal woman who became king. Artifacts from that time show the continued reverence for Aten, but her reign also appears to have been short-lived, squeezed between Akhenaten's death and the rise of Tutankhamun. This rapid succession shows just how unstable things were at court. The government was divided over the religious question, and connections with Egypt's traditional institutions were weak. That instability spilled over into everyday life. Major political decisions were no longer centralized, and Egypt's military, once reliant on rewards like land and loot, began gaining more influence. Generals, though technically still loyal to the pharaoh, started acting more independently to protect Egypt's strategic interests in Nubia and Canaan. People waited anxiously to see which ruler would step up and redefine Egypt's future. At the same time, exiled priests from Thebes were working to preserve the legacy of the god Amun. In Thebes, Amun worship continued in secret or semi-officially, driven by the belief that abandoning Amun had thrown off Egypt's cosmic and social balance, what they called Ma'at. Old rituals carried on in defiance, and many priests hoped for a return to normal religious life. Meanwhile, the priests of Heliopolis, a major center for the worship of the sun god Ra, found themselves in direct competition with Atenism. Heliopolis had long been a cornerstone of Egypt's solar tradition, but Akhenaten's exclusive focus on Aten stripped its priests of influence. That rivalry only deepened as time went on. Many in Heliopolis felt they should have been included in the reforms, given their historic role in solar worship. The debate over religious legitimacy became a power struggle. Whoever controlled sun worship also had access to economic resources and public loyalty. With Akhenaten's early death and the brief, poorly understood reigns of Smenkhkare and Nefertiti, Egypt was left without strong leadership. No pharaoh before had ever abandoned traditional religion so completely, nor had the country ever had a new capital so detached from its historical